Messina, December 28th, 1908. One city, two deaths, separated by 10 quiet minutes. The first death is stone and mortar, collapsing in the dark at 5:20 a.m. The second death is water, arriving after the screaming stops, when people think they're finally safe. And that's the question that won't leave me alone. Why did so many survivors die twice? Because in Messina, the correct escape route became a trap, and nobody had time to learn it. Picture a harbor city before dawn, ships asleep on black water, streets still holding yesterday's voices. A dock worker's boots by the door, a baker's fire waiting, a child curled under a thin blanket. Then the ground chooses a moment when almost everyone is indoors. Almost everyone is unready. Not a warning tremor, not a polite shake, a violent decision delivered in seconds. Walls fold inward, roofs punch down, staircases become slides of rubble, alleys become tombs. Some people wake inside dust so thick it feels like drowning, except there's no water yet. And in the first confusion, a simple instinct spreads. Get out. Find open space. Breathe. So they run toward the widest emptiness they can see. The waterfront, the sea, the open air. They don't know the shoreline is counting down, and the water is already moving. 10 minutes can be a lifetime, or it can be a corridor leading straight into the second catastrophe. Messina wasn't a random dot on the map. It was a hinge, a port city gripping the strait. Across the water, Reggio Calabria mirrored it. Two shores facing each other like open hands. Trade moved through here, travelers passed through here, news arrived by ship and left by wire. The harbor front was famous, long facades and proud buildings looking out at the sea. The city's rhythm was tied to tides, schedules, bells, and the steady confidence of masonry. But that confidence hid a weakness. Construction that wasn't meant to dance with earthquakes. Heavy roofs, brittle mortar, stacked stories, narrow streets that turned collapse into blockage. And beneath the streets, a ground that could amplify violence, soft soils that don't forgive shaking. In the historic center, density meant neighbors were close, and so were falling walls. When buildings lean toward each other, one collapse can start a chain, like dominoes in stone. Now add the hour, 5:20 a.m., when families are clustered in the most fragile place, home. Hospitals, barracks, offices. Many of the structures meant to organize rescue are hit too. So the city doesn't just lose buildings. It loses hands, tools, voices, leadership, coordination. This isn't only destruction, it's paralysis. And paralysis is how tragedies multiply. Because the earthquake is not the end of the story. It's the opening of a wider wound. Listen closely to survivor descriptions, and you hear the same pattern. Sound first, then chaos. A low roar like a train, a violent lurch, then the snap of beams, the shatter of glass. The main shock is over in less than a minute, but it steals years from the future. Some sources place the magnitude around 7.1, others estimate higher, but the result is the same. In Messina and Reggio, it feels like the ground itself has turned hostile, shaking off the city. Imagine waking to a ceiling falling toward you. doorway already swallowed by debris. You don't think in full sentences. You think in raw commands. Breathe, crawl, pull, survive. Hands bleed against splintered wood. Fingernails break on brick. Lungs fill with powdery lime. Outside, streets are unrecognizable. Piles where corners used to be, voids where homes used to stand. The landmarks vanish first. Without them, people don't know where they are inside their own city. And then the aftershocks begin. Smaller hits that keep the living from trusting the air above them. Every tremor says, don't go back inside, even when the trapped are still calling from below. So rescue becomes a moral agony. Do you run into danger for one voice or save your family? The dust makes dawn look like twilight, and the twilight makes panic feel reasonable. In that half-light, the sea becomes a promise. Open space, no walls, no roofs, and no collapse. This is where the fatal logic begins, and it's almost impossible to blame. In most earthquakes, getting outside, away from buildings, is a life-saving move. An open waterfront feels safer than a corridor of cracking stone, especially with aftershocks biting. So people drift, then rush toward the harbor and the shore, gathering in clusters. Some are barefoot, some wrapped in sheets, some carrying children who never fully woke up. They stand beside water that looks calm, because the sea doesn't always warn with a scream. And here's the cruel part. 10 minutes is just long enough to believe the worst is over. Just long enough to take inventory of your body and to find your breath, to find a friend. Just long enough to make a plan and commit to it and walk deeper into it. Meanwhile, offshore, the seabed has been disturbed by displacement, by collapse, by movement we debate even today. One mainstream explanation points to seafloor displacement from the quake. Another emphasizes underwater slides. Either way, the water is being rearranged, lifted, pushed, pulled into a traveling wall. It doesn't need hours, it needs minutes, because the strait is narrow and the source is close. So while survivors face the sea to breathe, the sea is already on its way back. At first, the shoreline can do something eerie. Retreat, as if the ocean is inhaling. That retreat can look like relief, like extra land appearing where water used to be. And in a shattered city, a retreating sea can feel like a gift, not a warning. Then the wave arrives, and it doesn't behave like a normal wave. It behaves like a moving flood. It surges into streets that are already broken, funneling through debris like water through teeth. People who ran from falling roofs now run from a rushing wall that carries wood, stone, iron. The water doesn't just drown. It strikes, it drags, it crushes, it pins bodies against rubble. In a port city, the wave can weaponize the harbor. Boats slam loose. Timbers become spears. And for those clustered near the waterfront, where there is no high ground in 10 minutes, the twist is brutal. They survive the ground, only to be collected by the sea. Some die standing, some die holding onto railings, some vanish in the foam and never return. If you want a single image of tragedy, imagine footprints in wet sand that end abruptly at chaos. Now widen the lens. This isn't a beach. It's a city edge, packed with desperate people. And when the water pulls back again, it takes the survivor's last certainty with it. This is why 10 minutes matters. It's the space between instinct and consequence. In those minutes, nobody has a megaphone, nobody has a system, nobody has a warning protocol. The earthquake has already severed the city's nerves. Telegraph lines damaged, rail routes mangled, roads blocked. Then the tsunami worsens it, breaking submarine cables that carried messages under the sea. So Messina becomes, in effect, a city that cannot call for help and cannot answer when help calls back. Think about that. You can be dying in full view of the harbor, and the world can't hear you. Information moves slowly now, by runner, by ship, by fragments of rumor that travel faster than facts. And rumor in a disaster is gasoline. It ignites panic, it ignites anger, it ignites blame. Some people assume the government knows and is coming. Others assume nobody knows at all. Meanwhile, the injured are everywhere, and the places designed to treat them are in ruins. Doctors, nurses, patients. Many are lost under collapsed hospitals, turning relief into improvisation. You can't triage properly without light, without supplies, without clean water, without transport. So wounds that would be survivable become fatal. Bleeding, infection, exposure, shock. And the cold logic of disaster appears. The second wave isn't water, it's time. Look at old photographs of the ruins, and you notice how complete the flattening is. Not damaged buildings, but absence. Streets erased, blocks reduced to uniform gray. Where there were 5-story homes, where there are piles that barely reach a person's chest. Where there were churches and civic buildings, there are broken arches like ribs. In some places, rubble forms ramps. In others, it forms pits that swallow the wounded. And because the quake hits close to the surface, the violence feels intimate, like a hand gripping the city. This is not just a natural event. It's an event shaped by what the city was made of. Poor construction turns shaking into mass collapse, and mass collapse turns rescue into archaeology. You don't search rooms anymore. You search layers, roof, floor, bed, body, silence. People listen for tapping, for coughing, for any sign that a pocket of air still exists. Sometimes they find someone alive after days, and it feels like a miracle carved from dust. Other times they dig, and they find a hand, still wearing a ring, still holding nothing. The city becomes a choir of missing names, and each missing name is a universe collapsed. And then another micro-reveal. In the ruins, fire starts to rise. Gas lines and stoves, technology meant for comfort, can turn into ignition when the ground snaps. Contemporary accounts describe fires spreading through shattered neighborhoods, feeding on broken wood and spilled fuel. Smoke thickens the already dusty air, turning daylight into a stained, coughing haze. Firefighters, if they survive, face a nightmare. No water pressure, no clear roads, no stable walls. A city that is already a maze of rubble becomes a maze of heat, And heat changes choices. You can't dig where flames are licking. You can't linger where smoke is swallowing oxygen. So even rescue becomes selective, not by cruelty, but by physics. And when night returns, the ruins glow in places, like the city is burning from inside out. Now imagine the sounds: distant cries, collapsing timbers, the hiss of fire, the low rush of water draining back. This is how a single morning can hold multiple apocalypses, stacked like layers of ash. Some people flee inland, but streets are blocked. Some flee upward, but stairs are gone. Others stay near the harbor because ships feel like salvation, if you can reach them. And in the middle of all this, the dead are everywhere, and the living must step around them. That detail matters, because it's where the next tragedy begins: human behavior under collapse. When a city loses order, it doesn't become lawless instantly. It becomes desperate first. People search bodies for identification, for keepsakes, for proof that someone existed. Some search for food and water because hunger doesn't pause for grief. And some, inevitably, take advantage, looting, robbing, even stripping jewelry from the dead. It's easy to condemn from a safe century, or it's harder when you imagine thirst and fear as daily weather. Still, authorities faced a brutal calculation: stop chaos or lose what remained of control. Martial law is declared, troops arrive, and the city's pain gains a new edge: discipline. Records describe harsh orders to suppress looting, and those orders become controversial in hindsight. Because in a ruin, looter and survivors searching for bread can look terrifyingly similar. So the moral landscape fractures too. Rescue versus punishment, mercy versus fear, order versus humanity. This is the disaster after the disaster, the social aftershock that can last longer than the shaking. And it deepens trauma. People don't just mourn, and they watch each other, suspect each other, hide. A city that was once a community becomes a field of individual survival strategies. Meanwhile, the outside world is still trying to understand what happened, because messages are delayed and incomplete. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the first rescuers are not the ones you expect. Ships in or near the harbor respond quickly because they're already there, already afloat, already mobile. Foreign crews, Russian and British sailors among them, move into chaos with ropes, stretchers, bare hands. The imagery is cinematic, but it's also practical. Ships carry tools, doctors, medicine, and a place to evacuate to. A vessel can become a hospital when a hospital is gone. A deck can become a shelter when a street is rubble. Sailors dig where they can, lift beams, pull survivors out, and then carry the dead away from the living. This matters because it shows how disasters ignore borders. Help arrives by proximity, not by passport. And for survivors, seeing unfamiliar uniforms can feel like hope, or like another layer of confusion. Because who is in charge now when your mayor is missing, your police station is crushed, your telegraph is dead? Authority becomes a patchwork. Military orders, ship captains, volunteers, priests, anyone who can organize a line. In those first days, organization is as valuable as food. It turns panic into action, even if imperfect. But action has limits, because you can't rebuild roads in hours, and you can't unbreak a submarine cable with prayer. So evacuation begins. People moved to other cities, families split, names lost in transit. And that is another kind of death. The death of continuity, the end of normal for thousands at once. If you zoom out, the death toll numbers vary by source. Tens of thousands, sometimes cited near or above 100,000. The exact count is blurred by the era's records, by missing bodies, by entire streets erased without lists. But the scale is not in doubt. It's one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern European history. And the damage isn't only bodies. It's the port economy collapsing, the workforce disappearing, the city's role interrupted. For a harbor city, losing docks and warehouses is like losing lungs. Trade can't breathe without them. Temporary depopulation follows. People flee, are evacuated, or simply cannot remain among smoke and ruin. Then reconstruction draws people back and draws new workers in, reshaping the city's demographics like wet clay. And here's the legacy twist. The catastrophe forces the state to think in terms of prevention, not just mourning. A year later, Italy moves toward national seismic classification and building standards, a legal pivot born from rubble. A royal decree in 1909 becomes a milestone. Early evidence that how we build is a life and death policy. That's the uncomfortable lesson. Nature delivered the blow, but vulnerability, poor construction, poor preparation, multiplied it. And the 10-minute gap becomes a symbol. The gap between what people know and what they need to know. Because if you don't know tsunami risk, run to open space is logical and lethal. So the story of Messina isn't only about 1908, it's about the cost of not teaching the right instinct. Now, return with me to that shoreline, to the moment before the wave, when hope still feels solid. Imagine a mother counting her children, a man checking his own shaking hands, a crowd breathing together. They don't have a siren, they don't have an alert system, they don't have a word for what's coming. They have only the sea, quiet, familiar, and suddenly wrong. The water pulls back, and some step forward, curious, searching for a sign that life is returning. Then the horizon tightens, and the ocean becomes a moving wall, rushing into a city that cannot run. Bodies collide with debris. Screams vanish under impact. The line between land and water disappears. Minutes later, survivors stare at emptiness, where people stood, like a stage after the actors are gone. That is what died again means. Not metaphor, not poetry, but a second selection of who remains. And in the hours after, the city is a paradox, full of humans, yet stripped of human systems. No reliable communication, no clean pathways, no stable roofs, no guarantee that tomorrow exists. Rescue becomes hand-to-hand labor, and grief becomes a permanent background sound. The sea, the port, the streets, everything that once meant commerce and connection now means loss and separation. So when we call it a natural disaster, Remember, the second half is human. What we built, what we knew, what we didn't. If you want to understand the horror, don't start with numbers. Start with logistics. How do you move the injured when roads are broken and rail lines are twisted? How do you treat fractures when hospitals are crushed and medical staff are missing? How do you coordinate rescue when telegraph lines are severed and submarine cables are snapped? Each answer is a delay, and each delay converts pain into death. That's why disasters feel like multiplication. One failure triggers the next, like gears locking together. The quake breaks structures, the tsunami breaks escape routes, the fires break air, the silence breaks coordination. And in that broken world, even good intentions can cause harm. Crowds gathering in dangerous zones, rumors spreading fear. Authorities impose martial law to stop collapse of order, but harsh enforcement can create new tragedies. Meanwhile, ships in the strait become lifelines, and foreign sailors become unexpected hands of mercy. You can almost see the camera move, from crushed streets to smoky ruins, to a warship's deck crowded with refugees. Faces wrapped in blankets, eyes fixed on the shore, as if looking back could undo what happened. And behind them, the harbor they once trusted has turned into a graveyard of wood and stone. This is the kind of mourning that redraws a city's identity and leaves the old map useless. Years later, reconstruction reshapes Messina and Reggio, not only in buildings, but in memory. Urban plans change, standards shift, and the idea of earthquake-resistant buildings stops being academic. The 1909 legal steps toward seismic classification are more than paperwork. They're the state admitting vulnerability. But even the best law arrives after the worst lesson, because law is slow and earthquakes are not. So the real inheritance is psychological. A coastline is never just a coastline after a tsunami. A tremor is never just a tremor when you've seen buildings become dust in 37 seconds. Messina teaches a hard rule. Survival is not only strength, it's information at the right moment. If the city had known to run uphill, not seaward, the second death might have been smaller. But knowledge didn't travel fast enough in 1908. And the cables that carried it were literally underwater. So the story closes where it began. 10 minutes, shorter than a coffee break, longer than a prayer. If you had 10 minutes between an earthquake and a tsunami, where would you run? And why? I'm Tim, watching the past so we can understand the present. And maybe choose better when seconds matter. And if you want to verify this story for yourself, start with 3 neutral checks. Look up official civil protection summaries about the quake, tsunami timing, and broken submarine cables in the strait. Then compare multiple sources on casualty estimates and the debate over tsunami cause. Displacement versus landslide. Finally, read about Italy's 1909 seismic decree and ask what changed in building practice after Messina.